Okay, well, welcome everybody to our June webinar on reviving downtowns, partnership with Main Street America today. I'm Glenn Ferris. I'm the new program manager and ODAN specialist here at Indiana Main Street. Just a couple of reminders before we get this kicked off and headed over to Amy for our program today. This is recorded and will be posted on the Okra YouTube channel. So just keep that in mind. And if it's possible, it's awesome to see faces on a Teams call. I know not everyone's in a place where you can have your cameras on, but if you can, I'd love to put some names and faces together as I'm learning all of our main streets across Indiana. And then as we're going through, Amy has lots of material that's going to hopefully spurn some really good questions from you guys. Feel free to throw those in the Q&A function up at the top of the bar. At the very end, we'll go through those questions and answer all of those. So if you kind of just write those down, we'll get to those at the end. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy to get us started. So Amy, whenever you're ready.
Well, good morning / afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for sharing your lunch time with us today. I'm really glad to be with you. So let's see. I am trying to see how quickly my computer's responding to advancing the slides, and then I'm going to introduce myself. Up. All right. It is. Definitely. All right, here we go. So I'm based in Central Texas. I live about 20 miles east of Austin. I'm a program officer for Main Street America. And so that's the department that provides both virtual and in-person workshops and technical services. My background is in downtown development. And so for me, I worked as an executive director for about 25 years and a historic preservation officer. My work has been with municipalities, specifically supporting the Main Street approach and an overall downtown development. And then I've also worked with community engagement, communications, grant writing, grant administration, all the many hats that go with getting to work with place-based economic development. And so I'm glad to be with you today. Would love it if you guys would introduce yourselves in the chat. I'm going to click here so that we can have that kind of running on the side. It'd be great to know who everybody is and your organization. And then, of course, we're going to use the Q&A for our actual questions. So thank you. Here's a little bit of an agenda of the types of things that we're going to cover today in our hour together. And so let's hop to it. And thanks for filling up the chat there with who you are and where you are and what your organization is. It's awesome. All right, so Main Street is a national program that has about 1,600 communities participating across the United States. On our part, we operate through the Main Street approach, which was developed by Mary Means in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and started in the Midwest. Very specifically, the idea being that place matters in terms of economic development, and that through this 4-point approach of design, organization, promotion, and economic vitality, you could sustainably reinvent and redevelop downtown commercial districts across the United States, from smallest 200 to 300 population we work with all the way up to major neighborhood commercial districts. We are a subsidiary of the National Trust and appreciate this thought from Carol Quillen, the just very recently past director for the National Trust, that bringing new life to these spaces that we value is what helps them survive in the long term and continue to be relevant to our communities. On our part, we have we stand for community-driven work. The work of Main Street and Historic Preservation is very grassroots oriented. We believe that small incremental steps over time lead to really big results. And we are very much a partnership, looking to the future driven organization. We do our work through coordinating programs. So in this case today, we are here, thank you to the Indiana Coordinating Program. We have about 46 coordinating programs throughout the United States. And then here's our map. It kind of gives you a feel for the national perspective of the organization. This brings you access to, of course, all these different perspectives, as well as from a population, but also from a geography perspective as well. And we know that our 4 points, again, economic vitality, design, promotion, and organization. And today we're really focusing on design and that sense of place as we talk about historic preservation commissions and how they can work with us and be a real partner, one of the biggest partners in terms of the design aspect of the 4-point approach. Main Street has had tremendous impact since we started counting things in 1980. Just last year, almost $10 billion in reinvestment, $23 for every dollar invested in a downtown Main Street program. So it's a huge return on investment. You guys are going to receive the slides. Just so you know that information will be coming in. Deanna will share that out to you. And so for me, the elevator speech for what is this Main Street approach is that it's practicing economic development in the context of historic preservation through a grassroots driven effort. And on our part, it is a balancing act to keep these 4 points in play. And we certainly have seen over the years that the most sustainable programs and districts are the ones that are doing work in all 4 areas. So why is downtown so important? Why do we take the time to focus on this area? Well, one is that it is an architecturally significant portion of your community. It's also an incubator for small businesses. It's a thriving arts and culture location. Everybody's downtown is a little different in terms of what your calling card is and what your signature elements are. But it is an irreplaceable place in terms of that heart of the community and utilizing our historic preservation tools to keep that authenticity, but then also be moving forward. It is when we do the rehabilitation downtown, we're creating great economic impact. And we know that when we do major public infrastructure investments in downtown, we need that broad-based private public sector participation so that we're continuing to generate property taxes and sales taxes and other investments to be able to support that public infrastructure side of things. So as we focus on the sense of place, we are looking at how historic preservation commissions are critical partners in our work. So none of this happens with just like one person or just one piece. And so this slide is to kind of talk about all the people that we need at the table for this work to be successful. And so a historic preservation commission is working with property owners, business owners, developers that may be looking at the community. And that doesn't necessarily mean some big corporation from a big city. A developer can be a local person who is deciding to invest in property or multiple pieces of property. You have your municipal employees that are part of the factor, and then also our elected officials, especially at the city level, all of that with our Main Street program. So lots of people at the table. But what we're looking at here is how does the private sector, these folks who are investing in properties and investing in businesses, what do they need to be successful? And for them, they need consistency. They need for information to be clear, concise, available online as much as possible, and a clear roadmap. So when we talk about consistency and clear, this is something that a historic preservation commission and having a historic district can really help a community with, because that puts into place clear guidelines about what the requirements are for development in the district, and clear requirements for both business and property owners. And it also is on our part, when we provide it online, we're then supporting that these folks, you know, as a private individual, this is perhaps not your full-time job. This is something that you're doing on nights and weekends to figure out how to renovate a building, or to be looking at as a business owner. I really want to get a new sign, and Saturday night at 9 o'clock is when I decide to start looking for information about how to do that. The roadmap piece is where we come in with trying to help people see from start to finish, what are the steps, and where does the Historic Preservation Commission fit in those steps. But then also for me as a business and a property owner, the all the steps that it's going to take, how long are some of those steps going to take, and that helps us navigate through the permitting and the review processes that we're going to be facing. So some of that comes, like the Main Street program can be a really primary person in the road mapping and in helping people with the whole process. But the consistency, clear, concise aspect, that's on the Historic Preservation Commission's part, what they can bring to the table. So we have different kinds of districts, and so we've got folks from all over the network participating. And so just kind of wanted to do a little level set with the different options that you have. So you can do a local historic district, that's through ordinance at the local level. You can participate in something called a certified local government program, and that brings you resources, technical support. In Indiana, there's some scholarship support for training. It can really bring some additional resources to the table to help the Preservation Commission be a very engaged and prepared entity, and have more resources for how reviews are conducted. You can be a national registered district, which means that you create a local district and then you apply to have that district listed on the National Register of Historic Places. When properties or districts, not 100% sure how to go backwards since I've been using my mouse, but when properties or districts are listed on the National Register, that makes them eligible for national historic preservation tax credits and state credits and programs that have state options. And so, depending on, you know, different areas of how you exist, and in your local community, you, if you already have a Historic Preservation Commission, you want to kind of clarify how it's functioning, and if it's tied to a local ordinance or not, and whether or not you have any properties listed on the National Register and so on. But what does a Historic Preservation Commission do? So it is responsible for a specific geographic area, which is defined in that originating legislation. It is a regulatory body that is doing reviews of work that is happening in that geographic area. Usually they are looking at, typical phrasing is anything visible from the public right of way. So typically they're looking at the exterior of a building, but keep in mind that means they're looking at the front, the back, you know, the sides when it's on a corner or has, you know, an exposed exterior wall. And so they're using design guidelines. Some communities have local design guidelines, and some utilize, or those guidelines are based on the national standards for historic preservation through the Secretary of the Interior. We have a couple resources we're going to point to in a few minutes about that. They are an advocacy entity. And so that's one of the things that is helpful to a local Main Street program and to property and business owners, that they are advocates to the local government for historic preservation. And they are often an entity that provides education, or that can be providing community education increasing awareness locally of what historic preservation means and the work that's being done specifically in the downtown or in the community overall. And they can also be a partner in educating property and business owners about the resources that are available to them, what are great preservation kind of premises and why. So lots of things beyond just we meet once a month and review applications can be a part of the work for the Historic Preservation Commission. So the commission works in partnership with these entities. So you typically have a building official or a development services department, or sometimes it falls under planning and zoning, but there's a building division. So at your city, there is some department that is reviewing all the plans for work throughout the city. So if you're building a house, if you're building a new shopping center, if you're renovating a building downtown, if you're getting a new canopy on your building, if you're doing new plumbing inside, all of that work generates typically the need in the local community for permits. And so find out, if you don't already know, who your department is at the city. And the other piece that ties into this is code enforcement. So on my part, if I'm not actively renovating the building, but maybe it has broken windows, or the rear door has come loose, or various things like that, or maybe it has significant roof leakage issues, or these sorts of things. And so the code enforcement department, which is often co-located with that building department or planning and development and zoning, those are the two primary municipal staff departments or people that your property and business owners are going to be dealing with, and that you, both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Main Street Program, want to be working with directly, so that you can help build that relationship of what we're trying to do in the historic district, and how their work impacts that work overall, and trying to help figure out again this whole process and that roadmap of what does it take me to get from I need a new sign to I have a sign permit, or I want to buy this building and renovate it for this particular use. The Planning and Zoning Commission is another entity appointed by City Council, separate from the Historic Commission, and it is the entity that is affecting the uses that are allowed in these historic buildings. So on the part of the Historic Preservation Commission, one of the key partners in helping us facilitate strong preservation in the community, maintaining that architectural integrity, and then also supporting investment for that private sector. So we mentioned the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines, and what are we trying to achieve by making historic preservation a priority? And so you are looking at, again, that exterior of the properties. We're concerned about repairing things rather than replacing them, renovating buildings rather than tearing them down, looking at things that are reversible change. So for example, the color of paint that is used on the wood kick plates and storefront trim around storefront windows is a reversible change. Tearing out that storefront to put in a modern metal storefront is not so reversible. So sometimes it's important to be thinking about can this be easily altered or not? And then we're talking about things like how buildings sit in relation to the sidewalk, to the street in any given block, how they relate to each other. So all those physical pieces are what the standards are addressing. And we have these handy preservation briefs, thanks to the National Park Service, that provide a really excellent layman's understanding of good preservation practices and why they matter. And so these preservation briefs help you address everything from how to clean brick, how to do tuck pointing and repointing of brick to windows, to canopies, across the United States. So there are preservation briefs that are very specific to the types of buildings in different geographies and the types of architectural elements they have. But this is all free and available online. And so a historic preservation commission will often be using these, and then they should also be helping make these accessible to those property and business owners. Again, from that education aspect in terms of what can I do? So on our part, now that we have this, oh, thanks, Glenn. So we have an understanding of, we have a geographic area. We're reviewing primarily the exterior of the properties. That Historic Preservation Commission is that regulatory body using these standards that are consistent. And so sometimes a preservation commission can help you connect with and can help your property and business owners connect with technical resources. So one example of that would be if at the local level you've pursued a certified local government program. Another option would be as a Main Street community, being able to tap into technical assistance through that Main Street program. And then part of it would just be utilizing things like the preservation briefs. Some of it would be helping find local resources in terms of a retired architect or a neighboring community with an architecture firm that's interested in supporting historic preservation, but helping bring some technical support to the table. And some of it, you don't need to be an architect. Some of it is simply helping with things like paint color selection. And that could be somebody in the community who has an art or interior design background that can, because there's plenty of folks, myself included, that have no desire to choose a paint color. And being able to have somebody who is comfortable with that and experienced with all these shades from cool gray base tones to warmer, yellow base tones, and why that matters and how much difference it can make. That can definitely be more locally sourced and doesn't necessarily have to be professional in like an architecture perspective. And then we have helping folks connect with trade and contractors who have developed experience with historic preservation and doing historic preservation work. So sometimes that comes simply by the being able to share. These 3 property owners have recently done work and had very successful projects. So here's how you connect with them so that they can share those subcontractors or general contractors that they worked with. And some of it may be that you actually start developing a list of those sorts of contractor resources that are available. And again, the Historic Preservation Commission can be one of the partners in helping put that information together. If your program is part of a city and there are concerns about making recommendations, it's always okay to simply say, these are resources that we know have been used in the community, and we're not recommending the work. You need to do your own research, get your own bids, et cetera, to determine who you're going to use, but that it's being provided more purely from a resources perspective. And so I wanted to kind of walk us through some different types of projects because, again, this Historic Preservation Commission partner, they are looking at and reviewing all sorts of work in terms of what is happening downtown. And so they can connect with and have an impact, again, on both business and property owners, and can really help us with that overall sense of place throughout the district. So when we think about the signage throughout the historic district, and when we look at where we largely focus on the front of buildings, but the rear of buildings are really important too. And especially as investment in your downtown begins to to evolve and you start looking at those rear entrances, and maybe you're doing businesses that are accessed, the building's been split in half and now the back door is the front door for one business as well as for another business literally facing the street. When we think about how the public right of way can be used by the private sector, usually the Historic Preservation Commission has a role in the review and regulation of that. Maintenance is extremely important. And so part of that is when we walk through the downtown, when you see rotted wood and, peeling paint and general disrepair, that is as disenfranchising in terms of my desire to be there as a customer, as well as, the potential of whether or not I'd want to open a business there, as broken sidewalks or, and trash cans that haven't been emptied. So, helping folks with that understanding of how important the maintenance side of things is for the longevity of their building, but then also for that community perspective too. And then you may have somebody looking at doing new construction. And so that Historic Preservation Commission is a really important partner in terms of what does compatible infill look like and how are we figuring that out before somebody is applying to get a new construction building permit. So let's talk a little bit more about each one of these. So this is a good reference slide in terms of terminology and what different technical words really mean. So when we're talking about preservation, there is a difference between rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. Generally speaking, we tend to be in the rehabilitation category where we are making repairs and alterations, but we are not necessarily bringing things back to exactly what they were in their period of significance. So this building was built in 1890 and we're going to maintain and or recreate architectural elements to support that 1890s architecture. Projects don't necessarily have to follow true pure restoration. Rehabilitation has a little bit more of a leeway. So that'll be available for you for general reference in the slides. So maintenance and repair, very important. And not only from that perception and the aesthetics of the district, but also in looking at your neighboring properties. So when you have a building that is not, that is ignoring basic maintenance and how that impacts its neighbors and can potentially impact multiple buildings or properties in a block. The Historic Preservation Commission can be the partner that, again, that's helping from an education and advocacy perspective for what that means, not just to you as an individual, but to your neighbors as well. Signage is usually one of the biggest places where a Historic Preservation Commission touches. This is like the majority of their reviews in any given year are usually sign related. So new businesses come in, businesses leave, and what do they need? They all need signage. And so when we think about the different types of signage in the downtown district, one of the questions for you locally and for that Historic Preservation Commission is, do we have a sign ordinance for our historic district that allows for and addresses the different types of signage that we need downtown versus the types of signage that we would have in the commercial highway area of the commercial districts in the community. And so they are decidedly different types of signage that are needed. The size, the number of signs, the placement of those signs all works very differently in a downtown district than, again, in a commercial setting where they may be doing those very tall, large pylon signs at the big shopping center that lists everybody out, and then those backlit box signs that you see. So having a specific ordinance to address signage is one of the things that the HPC can be doing. Sorry about that, things. So when we think about alleys and rear entrances to properties, this may not be what you typically think of for the rear of the building, but it certainly can be. And so as much as the rear of a building is a very functional, and it may only be for deliveries, and so it's a metal door, and it's not a front public speaking space for necessarily for every business or property, it certainly can be. And so the Historic Preservation Commission can help think through what are the guidelines related to the rear of properties. And so what type of fencing is allowed? What type of door finishes would we be considering? And so the HPC would want to make sure that there's while full metal doors might be typical, if it's apartment investment that's happening at the rear of the building, they're going to want full light doors so that they have potentially, so that they have a different feel and more light gets in, etc. So lots of opportunities related to this rear alley aspect, being able to incorporate public art, potentially being able to use the alleys for events, etc. But how those alleys are maintained, what they look like, what kind of paving materials they use, those are all things the HPC can help address too. We've got a couple slides here for storefronts. Again, from a terminology perspective, when you are talking with the Historic Preservation Commission and your business and building owners, being familiar with all these technical terms about the different parts of a building is really helpful. And again, that's not necessarily something that the new business owner, or even the person who's just bought a building with the dream of renovating it, for business X or for their family, it's investments that they're necessarily familiar with. And so this is another piece from an education perspective, that this is, how is an HPC making their decisions? Their decisions are tied to this type of terminology, and again, those guidelines and the preservation briefs and so on. And a thank you to Oklahoma Main Street for this really great graphic that helps capture that. Then, of course, we have a whole variety of inappropriate alterations made over the years. Sometimes there's an opportunity to be able to remove those aluminum clad covers, and there's a beautiful, well-preserved historic architecturally significant piece behind it. That's not always the case. Sometimes the damage back there is enough that maintaining the cover is what needs to happen. But there's opportunity to help from an education and a technical assessment perspective on that, and helping people be able to visualize what that storefront and that the front of the building could look like. This question of painting unpainted brick and the impacts of that, a Historic Preservation Commission and having those local guidelines can help in this area too, because when you paint brick, really all you're doing is creating maintenance issues for yourself on the outside, as well as deterioration issues on the inside because of all that moisture that can't escape. So the infill question, and this is yet another example of where the Historic Preservation Commission is the regulatory body, and the Main Street program gets to be the partner with them, helping with that education aspect, being able to advocate for the building and the business owners within this framework that you understand that the HPC is working within. Addressing before people want to do new construction and infill as to what that's going to look like and what those rules are going to be is much more effective than trying to change somebody's plans that have already been submitted. And so it does make a difference in a historic district, in an existing commercial business district, that your building lines up with the other buildings, that you have this 0 lot line setback, that you're next to that sidewalk, that you're not set back with parking in front of your building, and that you're maintaining these vertical lines on a building as well as the horizontal lines in terms of the shape of the windows, the and the increment of, usually these buildings are in 25 linear foot storefronts. And so that rhythm from left to right. So all of those things, the HPC can help kind of lay out those guidelines again in the beginning, so that you have fewer issues to deal with when somebody comes in with new construction. So public space, the HPC is going to be involved in reviewing sidewalk and all sorts of, again, all that exterior public element. But there are tools in addition to the Historic Preservation Commission that help us impact this investment and what public space looks like. So the comprehensive plan for a city, your parks, rec, and outdoor space master plan is a key place for the Main Street program and the HPC to be at the table, helping in both of those in terms of what are the community priorities and, you know, where investments could be made, where can a park infill spot or expansion be considered in the historic district. The capital improvement plan, many cities have this. It's referred to as a CIP, and that is where the city projects over a period of 5 years or more as to what their major capital improvement projects would be. And so the HPC can be one of the advocates at the table there, helping prioritize either general public investments like sidewalk work or ADA accessibility improvements, or public space improvements like parks. Regional plans are really important from a funding perspective, especially related to streetscape work. And again, they can be one of the advocates for the community on that front. And then a public art plan can really facilitate how to just kind of streamline the public art process in conjunction with an HPC's reviews. So using public space for the private sector. So when we think about the sidewalks and the streets, the parking spaces throughout our downtown, and we ask ourselves as a business owner, how can I use that space? So can I have a display in front of my storefronts? You know, am I allowed to put merchandise out? Am I allowed as a restaurant to potentially do tables and chairs and have sidewalk dining? And then the parklets are the idea of taking a limited number of parking spaces and utilizing those again for the private sector. So for each one of those examples, because it's public space being used for private benefit, you do need to have regulations in place for how that works. And part of it is, again, from this clear and consistency perspective, so that we don't have, you know, restaurant A gets to have tables and chairs and all the other restaurants are like, I don't know why they have tables and chairs. And then nobody can clearly explain to me how I could have tables and chairs. So part of it is that. And part of it is making sure that we don't create a nuisance in allowing the private sector to use the public space. So when we think about sidewalk displays, yes, we want you to be able to display merchandise, but not 24/7 and not as storage or you know, junk holding for your building. And so the ordinance can address that it's during business operating hours and have those parameters in place. And then when it comes to the sidewalk dining, again, you do need to address that the minimum feet of sidewalk that are left open for public egress and pedestrians coming and going versus how much can be used for the sidewalk dining, types of furniture, whether you're like, it has to be metal or wood, etc. So the HPC can be the entity that is developing these ordinances. Ultimately, they're probably, especially with sidewalk dining and these parklets, are going to be the entity reviewing it. And the parklets also have the opportunity to maybe just be as a pop-up event, not that we're permanently taking these 2 or 3 parking spaces and making them into a seating area for a business. But how can I, when I'm having, you know, a special sale, or I'm doing a celebration of my 10-year anniversary or my 5-year anniversary, and I want to have an extended space of my business. Are there ways for us to facilitate that private sector temporarily using public parking spaces too? But again, that HPC can be the entity that helps us walk through those detailed of what the requirements should be and how it should work, and helping us get those reviews done. When we look at streetscapes, there are some great resources from Main Street America related to developing streetscapes and funding sources for that. And your HPC is going to be reviewing all of that type of public space work. And so they can be at the table as you develop those plans for improvements. They can be at the table as you're helping assess the downtown district and just doing walkthroughs together to figure out where do we need accessibility improvements, where do we need sidewalk improvements. But yeah, we've got some resources at the end of the slide deck to share links for those guides from Main Street America. And there's certainly sometimes when we think about the public space improvements, we are just thinking about sidewalks, but it really is all the things that create that sense of place in our downtowns. And so the planners and the light posts and the banners that are on those light posts, maybe there is a place for a really cool, funky, unusual bench opportunity. Maybe in your community, there's the desire is to have, traditional metal benches throughout the downtown, and there isn't a place for something kind of off the wall like this. But again, that HPC is the entity that's going to help you figure out what these standards are. What type of bench are we going to have downtown? What type of trash cans are we going to use? And how are we going to create that consistency so that it feels like it all fits together and works as one. Public art is an incredible way to engage people in your district, to have fun. This example here is literally that is part of the rain gutter system on the building. And it does play music when rain is occurring at a volume to put enough water through it. So we can do all kinds of really fun and interesting things with public art downtown. And the HPC can work in conjunction with your local arts organization to figure out what do these guidelines for public art downtown look like? How do I approach this as an artist who wants to do work in the downtown, as a property owner who wants to have public art, or as a business owner who wants to add public art? How does that process work? And what are the reviews associated with it? And so when we're sliding into the home stretch here for advocacy and education, the Historic Preservation Commission can be a partner that helps you with things like imagining the possibilities and sharing space through walking tours. They can do architectural tours. This happens to be two examples, one from Texas and one from Kansas, where they are showcasing space that's available for investment or that's available for occupancy. And so in both instances, these are property tours that are looking at buildings that could be renovated, buildings that are in process of renovation, and buildings that are ready for occupancy. And usually these tours also share success stories in terms of, we've had some second story loft development, and we're going to show off those finished loft spaces, as well as showcasing buildings that are available for sale or that are, again, in process of renovating. And so the HPC can be a partner that helps put these tours together, helps implement them in terms of being at the various buildings, being available to answer questions. These tours are usually kind of have two target audiences, and often there literally are two tours. So on Kansas's part, they were holding theirs, I think it's scheduled there to be during lunch, and they were targeting loan officers, financial investment partners, realtors to come and see the buildings. And then oftentimes there's a second tour on like a Thursday night or a Saturday morning that's geared towards the local community, and just come see all this great stuff that's happening in our downtown and the work that's going on. The building inventory is a critical piece that an HPC can help get put together. So important for us to know the status of the buildings throughout the district, not just who owns them and how to reach that owner, but also physically what condition are those buildings in, and where does that property owner need information and resources? Where does maybe that business owner need that information? But being able to getting this put together helps us be able to do regular communication with those building owners, so that you're not just reaching out to them when they've not gotten a permit or they've, done something wrong, so that it's not all just negative connections. And Main Street America has the Booms Tracker, which is one of the tools that you can use to do that building inventory tracking system. It's not the only way to do it, but that's a resource that's available. And then when we think about advocacy and education throughout the year, and remembering that while May is Historic Preservation Month nationally, and we certainly want to be doing things and working with our Historic Preservation Commission to celebrate during that special month, we also want to be doing things throughout the year to educate the local community, as well as educating those business and property owners about the work of the Historic Preservation Commission, the work of the Main Street program, and how those entities are helping move things forward for the district. And certainly everybody should be going to the ribbon cuttings, and the HPC board members should be coming to those ribbon cuttings. Hopefully everybody's sharing content on their social media in terms of, we're thrilled to see this new investment, loved working with them through the review process, et cetera. But there's definitely a lot to be gained in terms of awareness in the community, as folks are comfortable sharing some of that on their personal and professional social media outlets. And then also more formal things, of course, like hosting classes to help folks from how to do the basic maintenance, or how and why we should be preserving historic windows, etc. San Antonio, Texas is a great example of educational classes helping just the local community become their own tradespeople in some cases, in terms of how some of this work is done, and in addition to the importance of it. And it's not all in person. There's certainly places for online tours, online classes, providing links on the website to technical resources, and then promoting to building and business owners as to how to get to that technical data and access it. And so I want to take just a minute, if Glenn, if you want to pop in and talk about Franklin, Indiana, as on my part, I did a little summary here of the work in Franklin, and that Franklin, while they don't have an HPC, they are working towards having something like that. So would you just talk for a minute about Franklin?
That's a dangerous question, Amy. So I live in Franklin, grew up in Franklin, so this is near and dear to my heart. So Franklin, they don't have an HPC, but they do have an overlay district. So it's a zoning district throughout their downtown that they're working on getting updated with some stricter guidelines and standards. So doing a lot of the work of an HPC. They do have a preservation organization in their town called Franklin Heritage. Not every Main Street has a separate preservation organization. I know a lot of you guys have just your Main Street, but they have both in Franklin. So they run a facade program through their development corporation. So it's a quasi-government partnership, and they do facade programs for both residential and commercial buildings. It's about 113 facades so far, and that's really transformed the Main Street district as a whole. And it's nice the design committee from Main Street serves as the design consultants for those facade programs. So while the city can't come in and say, we recommend so-and-so to do your work. The design committee, as a third party, is allowed to recommend contractors and practices, or looking at other communities and their resources. So there's a lot of great partnerships between the city, the Main Street, and the preservation group that all kind of coexist together. And the latest program that they did that you can see on the slide is their Monumental Memories program, which was a historic preservation education grant, which is a great resource for all Main Street communities in Indiana. Comes up twice a year and helps provide funding for just advocacy and awareness for the general population. So right beyond, just north of this stanchion, is a public parking lot, and the back of this map case, which was just black for a couple of years, now has a nice display on what was on that block before it was just parking lots. And people who visit all the time, who grew up in town, get that little bit of, oh, I didn't know that, or I wish we had a bowling alley downtown, things like that. So it's a great conversation piece. Those just went up in, I believe, February, so those are pretty new. I think they're going to add a couple more throughout the downtown. That's a fun way to get preservation out there without being really, without saying you're doing preservation.
Right.
Sometimes the verbiage is important. Just south of this monumental memory is the courthouse. And I know a lot of counties are moving out of their courthouses in Indiana. In the 80s, Johnson County decided to refurbish their courthouse. So we had civic buy-in, so they cleared out the basement and made more offices in what was just a dusty basement. So that's an awesome advantage. We have a nice courthouse to anchor our downtown, which is nice as the county seat. And then through their Main Street, they're working on a walking tour app that you can just scan a QR code, hop on a historic sign tour, historic building tour, things like that. And they can add lots of videos, recorded parts. It's accessible. And so I can drop the name of that app company in the chat in a second. They're developing that right now. So I mentioned Franklin Heritage. That's the preservation group. They've restored 14 properties across the city. If you look at the background of this photo, the Art Craft Theater is one of the buildings that they own and operate. They saved it from becoming a parking lot. And now it's a major hub of tourism and just downtown vitality. People come to movies and events and then go to the bar or the restaurant right afterwards. So it's a great downtown anchor and a third place for this Main Street. And then Franklin.
That is great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cut me off because I'll talk all day. So.
Well, and it is such a nice variety of historic preservation related aspects here. And so what a great way to acknowledge what has been lost, but really be celebrating the culture and heritage and history of the community with the memories and the Monumental Memories program, but just some really great examples of engagement and in this case, this webinar has really focused on historic preservation commissions and that formal regulatory body and how it can be a partner in the work that it's doing. But there are, as we said at the beginning, there's more than one way to be doing this historic preservation work. And so one of the things that we wanted to emphasize is that there are historic tax credits available, both national preservation tax credits and state tax credits for Indiana. And so this slide provides some summaries of that and some links for resources. And then from a zoning overlay perspective to tie into Franklin, a zoning overlay can address here. I was use this specifically to talk about uses, and this example in Elgin, Texas, where they create their red line here is the actual historic district. The overall area in yellow and blue is a zoning overlay that addresses mixed use. These blue, everything in blue, they consider their walkable pedestrian core, and those are required to have a greater amount of commercial activity, but they allow residential uses at the rear of these buildings. And then it's a whole variety of uses that are allowed, which is not something that is regulated or addressed by the HPC, but an overlay for a historic district, as they're doing in Franklin, is a way to use a zoning overlay to support historic preservation efforts. And then I also wanted to mention the existing building code, and adopting the existing building code can be another really great tool, again, for those municipal partners. They have very specific ordinances, building codes that they are looking to when they're doing those reviews. And the existing building code can be a tool, especially for that building code official, the plan reviewer, to have more options as to how what properties are required to do and how they are meeting life safety health code requirements. Amazing resources from Indiana, and this will be in your slide deck. Main questions for Indiana slide that you'll get. And then from us, just a little summary. The preservation briefs, I believe, are one of the best tools available for historic preservation in commercial districts especially. We have our new Main Street America Academy. There are a number of classes free that are design place-based related that you can just take, and you can share this with volunteers that are on that commission or that are on your design team, the folks who are interested in that type of preservation work. And then a couple books that I've really enjoyed. So Paved Paradise is a perspective on parking. And then the other one here is called Where the River Burned. And it is a recap of Cleveland in the late 1970s, the first Black mayor in the nation, and the urban renewal and environmental impact things that were all happening. So it's kind of a combination of EPA and historic preservation together. And of course, great toolkits from us. You'll get links for all that. Insurance coverage. Insurance is sometimes a really big challenge for historic property owners. So if you are having issues locally, certainly always go to your local insurance options first. But if there are issues that you can't find insurance for whatever reason, this National Trust Insurance Services is, again, a partner and associated with the National Trust, and they specialize in historic properties and working with those folks. So would love it if you take a minute to do a little feedback through our survey while we take some questions. So do we have some questions in our Q&A?
I'm not seeing any in there at the moment, but if you have one, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll address it real quick. I know this is a slog to get through all of that because there's just so much to talk about with Main Street and design. Amy, while we're waiting for one, I know we only have a few minutes left. What's the best way to get a business owner who might be reluctant about design or preservation to get involved and to see the benefit?
Sure. So I would say that one of the things is to visually help them see what the opportunities are. So if we look at signage and the business owner wants to do new signage, but they're not really clear about what they want, helping them see the type of signage that could be applied to their building from a visual perspective. And you can do that with examples of other buildings in the district, where you can physically meet with them downtown and say, well, look at that Blade sign that's, up for the Western Wear store. You could have a Blade sign like that. And here's why that's helpful. Blade signs direct vehicular traffic as well as pedestrians and so on. Another example would be visually helping folks deal with like special colors that they want to use, or like if you have a realtor downtown and their branding is, kind of bright pink signs, that's their logo and that's their identity. So how can that be incorporated into a storefront? They've got a beautiful example of a Lions Club thrift store that wanted to use their signature purple and gold colors on their storefront, and how that was incorporated into their cast iron columns. So, kind of listening to that business owner about what is it, what is your concern, what is your motivation, what are your needs, and how can we help address that? Um, and oftentimes, our solutions are also very cost effective. And so, when we think about signage, you can, help with that idea of being able to phase signage. You can do the blade sign first, and then you can do storefront signs, or those sorts of things. So we can be helpful on those aspects as well.
Awesome. Okay, looks like we got one question coming in. It's loading. So this is from up in Gary, Indiana, the northwest part of the state. It says, I saw national chains located on Main Street. Examples that you displayed on slides. What are the advantages or disadvantages of chains in your downtown district?
I think national chains can be great partners in your downtown. Edward Jones is one that comes to mind. There's a whole wealth of signage options that a firm is allowed to choose from. And so again, meeting with that business owner and starting with, so what, from a franchise chain perspective, what are they, what are they providing to you? Sometimes digging a little deeper to find the, more different, interesting types of signage that they allow, or is it just that the brand name has to be included, and how we can do that. But the national chains are in historic business districts throughout the country, large and small, and certainly they can very, very effectively coexist. Sometimes they take existing historic signage and utilize it. Sometimes it's a matter of including their branding in, again, an architecturally sensitive way, but still it's their recognizable logo. And when it comes to that new infill, they will work with the standards that that are required. It's not, you shouldn't feel like you're starting it at no. And certainly it takes a little more effort and creative communication about what some of the options are. But they can be a great investment. One of the benefits of a franchise is that for a business owner, I have a system of operations, and procedures of how things are going to be done and what's required from that perspective. So it can be really useful to a business owner who doesn't necessarily want to come up with everything from scratch.
Awesome. Well, I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. If you guys end up coming up with questions afterwards, please email us. We're always happy to help connect Main Streets with the resources that they need, especially when it's all about preservation. We're all about place-based economic development here at Main Street. So any last words, Amy, from you?
Just thank you so much. Really appreciate that you took time to share your day with us. And we're a resource here at Main Street America. So reach out and let us know what you need, what questions you have, and check out all the cool free stuff that's available on our website.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. I'll send an email here later today with all those links in the slideshow that has lots of information in it. So thank you guys so much.
Okay, well, great to be with you, Glenn. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for preparing all that and sharing it with us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you've got the slides, and
Mhm.
I'm actually going to send you the slide deck again because
Okay.
I have a number of resources slides that I hold.
Uh,
Usually there's not time to get to them,
okay.
so I'll get those loaded up for you so that they're in order, and I have some hidden slides that I'll unhide,
Okay.
and I'll send you the slide deck to share.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Go enjoy your lunch. I know this was over your lunch hour, so I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.